The clinking of glass against glass was a steady rhythm, a song Raylan had come to know too well. It was the sound of people celebrating anniversaries, promotions, friendships, and lives filled with meaning. For her, it was just noise. She sat at a small table tucked against the edge of the restaurant, the golden glow of chandeliers painting her skin in a light that made her look softer, almost delicate. Alone, with a half-eaten plate of pasta and a single glass of wine, she traced her finger along the rim of the glass, pretending it was enough to keep her from looking as hollow as she felt. Every laugh from the surrounding tables was another reminder. She was invisible. A woman who blended into the walls. She hadn't dressed to impress, hadn't painted herself in the colors that caught eyes or attention. A plain dress, simple shoes, hair tucked back neatly. She came here not to be noticed, but to escape the silence of her small, lifeless apartment. The restaurant's warmth was preferable to the cold loneliness waiting for her outside. Her eyes dropped to the silverware, her fork idle, her appetite gone, though she forced a bite now and then. She thought no one cared enough to watch her. But she was wrong. The door opened with the soft chime of the restaurant bell, and though most patrons barely noticed, the air shifted instantly. The servers froze for a beat, as though recognizing something they couldn't explain. A man walked in dressed casually, faded jeans, a dark jacket, nothing that screamed wealth or power. Yet somehow, the very space seemed to yield to him. His presence was subtle, but commanding, the kind that pressed against skin before his eyes ever found you. Mitchell. Few would have known him like this, stripped of his suit and armor of tailored perfection. He had come for peace tonight, away from blood-soaked business and the shadows of men who waited on his word to kill. But peace had a way of slipping through his fingers. He scanned the room slowly, his eyes trained to see beyond smiles and laughter, to sense the quiet edge of danger others dismissed. And there it was. At a table near the back, two young men, rivals from a crew he had clashed with too many times before, sat stiff, eyes trained not on their food, but on her. The woman alone. Raylan. Their gaze wasn't casual. It was sharp, hungry, cruel. Mitchell recognized it instantly. He had worn it once in another life. Men like that didn't stare unless they were calculating. He leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening, his body still but his mind already running through the possibilities. Why her? A stranger? A ghost in this glittering room? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't watch her be hunted while he sat still. Not here. Not tonight. Raylan shifted uncomfortably, sensing eyes on her, though she didn't know from where. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fork trembling slightly as she lifted another bite. She wanted to disappear into the shadows, but the world had a cruel way of pulling her into places she never intended. Mitchell's hand flexed on the table, his knuckles whitening for the briefest moment before he rose. His movement was like a blade slicing the silence, the kind that demanded attention without a word. Every head in the room turned as he walked across the polished floor, his steps deliberate, the air thickening with each one. Raylan's chest tightened as she looked up, startled by the sudden nearness of a man whose presence seemed to swallow the light. He leaned down, close enough for her to catch the faintest trace of smoke and steel that clung to him, the scent of a life lived on the edge of danger. His voice came low, smooth, dark enough to shatter her fragile world in a single breath. Tonight, you're mine. The words weren't a question. They weren't even a request. They were a claim, a warning, and maybe, just maybe, a promise. Raylan's mornings always began the same. The alarm clock buzzed in that flat, mechanical tone, dragging her from half-dreams she never wanted to wake from. She shuffled to the kitchenette of her one-bedroom apartment, set the kettle on to boil, and reached for the chipped mug she used every day. It was white once, now stained faintly from years of coffee. She wrapped her hands around it like it was the only warmth she could count on. She dressed in the same quiet way, Neutral sweaters, jeans without frays, shoes practical enough to walk the cracked sidewalks of downtown. Her reflection in the mirror was ordinary, forgettable. She had grown used to that. When she stepped onto the street, she blended into the tide of people, suited businessmen, young couples with clasped hands, mothers tugging children along. No one's eyes lingered on her. At the bookstore, her little world of dust and faded pages waited. She unlocked the front door, flipped the sign to open, and breathed in that old paper smell that always reminded her of safety. Mornings were slow. She'd sweep the floor, stack returned books, and wait for the trickle of customers who still cared enough to read. Most passed her with polite nods, their eyes already sliding away. At lunch, Mireya appeared like she often did, full of color and noise in a bright red dress that made the shop look even duller by comparison. She leaned on the counter, flashing her easy smile. "Another night eating alone, Ray?" she teased. Raylan shrugged, smoothing the receipts. "Better than pretending with someone who doesn't really see me." Mireya rolled her eyes, plucking a book from the display. "You keep hiding like this, you'll vanish. One day, someone will see you whether you want it or not. You'll see." Raylan smiled faintly but didn't answer. She wanted to believe it, but her evenings said otherwise. When the store closed, she walked home with a takeaway box balanced in her bag, always from the same corner diner. In her apartment, she sat by the window, watching the city lights blink to life. Couples laughed below on the street. Neighbors across the way shared dinners or fought loud enough for her to hear. And she sat with her pasta or noodles, the silence so loud it rang in her ears. She always told herself she was fine. But sometimes late at night, she whispered the truth. She longed for someone to look at her and not look away. On the other side of the city, Mitchell's life was carved by routines of an entirely different kind. He woke before dawn, not to an alarm, but to the habit of a man who never truly slept. His apartment above his office smelled of leather and smoke, walls lined with shelves of liquor and locked drawers. He trained first, push-ups, pull-ups, the sharp crack of fists against the leather punching bag in the corner. Discipline had kept him alive when loyalty never did. By 7, Lawrence was at the door with the morning report. Lawrence was more than muscle. He was the shadow that kept Mitchell standing, his right hand through every storm. 2 debts collected, Lawrence would say, flipping pages of a small black ledger. 1 shipment delayed. Donovan's men sniffing around the South Pier. Mitchell would listen, stone-faced, sipping black coffee instead of whiskey this early. Every word was a calculation, every detail another piece in the endless game he'd inherited and could never leave. The rest of the day was meetings, men who needed orders, enemies to be anticipated, deals to be struck. Faces passed through his office, some loyal, some not, but Mitchell kept them all at arm's length. Trust had been carved out of him the night his brother had bled on the pavement, betrayal written in every drop. By night, when the city pulsed with neon and temptation, Mitchell craved only silence. He'd sit with a glass of whiskey, blinds drawn, the world outside muffled. Sometimes he'd walk the streets dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, no guards, no entourage. People glanced past him, unaware. He liked it that way. For a few hours, he wasn't Mitchell the boss, the name that made men flinch. He was just a man, anonymous, breathing, remembering what it felt like not to be at war. But peace was fragile. Even in the quiet, he felt the pull of enemies circling. He could never truly escape the blood that stained his name. Raylan's invisibility and Mitchell's notoriety might have kept them in separate worlds forever. Yet fate had begun weaving them closer. She sat at her small table, pretending to focus on the last bites of her meal, but the echo of his words haunted her when he left and went back to his seat. "Tonight, you're mine." She wasn't sure if anyone else had heard, but to her it felt as though the whole restaurant had frozen, breath caught in their throats. She had questioned him, but he didn't give a response, just walked away. For a moment, she felt she had been seen. Too much. Too clearly. The rivals didn't move right away, but their eyes never left her. Raylan shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around her fork. She didn't understand the weight of their stares, the way the air felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. Mitchell understood. From his table in the corner, he watched her glance nervously toward the door, watched the rivals exchange a look that confirmed what his instincts already knew. They weren't just looking. They were waiting. Hunting. She had no idea. To her, it was just another lonely dinner in a city that never cared if she lived or vanished. But to him, the tension in the room was unmistakable. This wasn't coincidence. This was danger circling. He lit a cigarette, the ember flaring briefly in the low light, smoke curling upward like a shadow of his thoughts. He told himself to leave it, walk out, let her vanish back into the faceless crowd. She wasn't his business. She wasn't his problem. And yet, he stayed. Because the truth pressed hard in his chest, he couldn't walk away. Not from her, not tonight. And deep inside, though she didn't yet understand why, Raylan felt it too. The unsettling certainty that her invisible life had just been noticed. Marked by a man whose eyes carried both promise and danger. Raylan's heart still pounded as she paid her bill, fingers fumbling with the worn leather of her purse. The restaurant's soft golden light seemed harsher now, each laugh from another table grating against her skin. She could still feel the echo of his voice against her ear. "Tonight, you're mine." The words refused to let her go, clinging like a brand. She didn't know if anyone else had noticed, but her body burned with the sense that her life had just shifted in a way she couldn't explain. She rose from her seat, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. The waiters bustled around her, some casting subtle glances her way, as if they too had felt the air split open when he leaned down to claim her with nothing but a whisper. She told herself to keep walking, to step out into the night and breathe, but she couldn't stop herself from one final glance toward him. Mitchell sat in the corner, smoke curling lazily from the cigarette balanced between his fingers. His eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, caught hers across the room. He didn't nod, didn't smile. He just watched. And somehow, that was worse. Raylan pushed through the heavy door into the night air, the coolness rushing against her flushed skin. The city street was alive. Taxi horns, couples arm in arm, the neon signs of bars humming with color. She drew in a shaky breath, clutching her bag close. She told herself she was fine, that it was just a man, just a look, just words. But her body knew better. She didn't notice the two men rise from their table minutes after her, slipping into the crowd with practiced ease. Mitchell crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, jaw tightening as he watched them go. His instincts were never wrong, and tonight they screamed louder than they had in months. He had seen the look in Donovan's boy's eyes, the calculating hunger, the promise of violence. They weren't after him. They were after her. For reasons he didn't yet understand, that knowledge clawed at his chest. He rose, tossing bills onto the table, and walked out into the night. His steps were slow, measured, but every nerve in his body was sharpened like a blade. Raylan walked quickly, her heels clicking against the damp pavement. She clutched her umbrella though the rain had stopped, the city's shine reflected in shallow puddles. The further she walked, the emptier the street became, laughter fading into the distance until only her own footsteps remained. Then came another sound, faint at first. 2 sets of footsteps, just behind. Her stomach twisted. She glanced back, catching sight of 2 men in dark jackets keeping pace. Their faces were shadowed, but their eyes gleamed with something that made her blood run cold. Raylan swallowed hard, pulling her bag closer, quickening her pace. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining danger where there was none. But when she turned down the narrow street toward her bus stop, the men followed. Her breath caught. Mitchell's car idled at the curb. From the driver's seat, he watched them slip into the alley behind her. His pulse surged with something sharp and hot. He pushed the door open, stepping into the night, the click of it shutting echoing like a gunshot. "Keep walking, girl," he muttered under his breath, though she couldn't hear him. The two men closed in behind her. One reached forward, fingers twitching as though ready to snatch her arm. Mitchell moved. The first man didn't see him coming. A fist cracked against his jaw, sending him sprawling into the wall with a grunt. The second lunged, but Mitchell caught him by the collar and slammed him hard against the brick, his voice a low growl in the narrow alley. "You picked the wrong night." Raylan froze, spinning back to see the blur of violence unfolding. Her breath hitched, the world narrowing to fists and fury as the stranger from the restaurant, Mitchell, unleashed himself with terrifying precision. Each movement was brutal, efficient, honed from years of surviving wars she couldn't imagine. The first man tried to scramble up, but Mitchell's boot caught him in the ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. The second swung wildly, only to be caught by a hard elbow to the temple. Blood smeared across the wall, groans filling the space until both men were left half-broken on the ground. Mitchell crouched low, gripping one by the collar, his voice a quiet storm. "Tell your boss. Mitchell did this." His eyes burned like fire against ice. "And tell him to never touch this woman again." The man coughed, spitting blood. Mitchell let him drop, disgust curling in his chest. Raylan stood frozen, her hands trembling, eyes wide as she tried to process what she had just seen. This wasn't possible. This wasn't normal. A man she didn't know had just torn her world open with violence so precise it left her both horrified and trembling with something she couldn't name. Mitchell turned to her, his face unreadable in the shadows. For a moment, silence stretched between them, only broken by the groans of the men at their feet. "You're safe now," he said, voice low, steady. No promise, no explanation, just fact. Raylan shook her head, words stumbling in her throat. "Who are you?" Mitchell's gaze lingered on her face, as though weighing how much truth to give. Finally, he said only his name, his tone carrying weight like stone. "Mitchell." She whispered it back, tasting it like something forbidden. The sirens of the city wailed faintly in the distance, but Mitchell didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow street, his eyes holding hers. "You don't belong in this world," he murmured, "but they've already dragged you into it. Stay sharp. Stay alive." Raylan's chest tightened. She wanted to ask why, wanted to demand answers, but his gaze silenced her. This was a man who lived in a different kind of truth, one written in blood and shadows. He turned, leaving her standing alone in the alley, her pulse racing, her mind reeling. Behind him, the two men dragged themselves up, groaning, their pride more shattered than their bones. They would carry Mitchell's message back to Donovan, and the war would begin. Raylan didn't know it yet, but her life, so invisible, so quiet, had just been claimed by the man everyone feared. And she couldn't forget the way his eyes had burned when he looked at her, or the sound of his voice when he whispered those words that would not let her go. "Tonight, you're mine." Would you have run from Mitchell after seeing his brutal side, or trusted him because he protected you? The rivals stumbled into Donovan's headquarters like broken dogs, their faces swollen, their clothes smeared with blood and alley grime. The room reeked of smoke and whiskey, the heavy bass of music pounding faintly through the walls from the club upstairs. Donovan sat behind his desk, one leg crossed casually over the other, swirling amber liquor in a cut glass tumbler. His sharp eyes flicked up as the two men collapsed before him, gasping. "Well?" His voice was smooth, lethal, the kind that could turn silk into a noose. The first man spat blood onto the floor. "It was him, Mitchell." The glass stilled in Donovan's hand. Silence stretched, weighted and thick, before he leaned forward, his smile curving like a blade. "Mitchell?" The second man nodded, voice hoarse. "He beat us half to death. Said to tell you." He did it. And to stay away from the woman. The liquor glass shattered against the wall, shards scattering like sharp truths across the floor. Donovan surged to his feet, fury radiating from him. A woman! His laughter was hollow, edged with venom. He makes a declaration of war over a woman? The men lowered their heads, trembling. Donovan paced, rage simmering beneath his skin. He had always wanted a reason to bring Mitchell down. To him, this wasn't protection. This was weakness, and weaknesses were meant to be crushed. Find out who she is to him, Donovan ordered coldly. If he thinks she's worth bleeding for, then he'll bleed. He has drawn the line. Raylan tried to slip back into the quiet rhythm of her days, but the memory of that night clung to her like smoke. The whisper in the restaurant, the violence in the alley. The name, Mitchell, burned into her mind. She told herself to forget, to let it dissolve into the blur of another lonely week. But the city wouldn't let her. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. At the bookstore, men lingered too long near the door. On her walk home, footsteps echoed just a little too close. She convinced herself it was paranoia, yet her chest tightened each time the shadows seemed to move. And then there was him, Mitchell. At first it was small things. A dark car parked across from the shop when she closed. The flash of a figure leaning at the corner when she turned down her street. Then it was bolder. Him stepping forward when the crowd thinned, offering her his arm as she crossed the street. You again, she murmured one night, her voice caught between irritation and confusion. Coincidence, Mitchell said, though his eyes gave him away. Raylan shook her head, keeping her pace brisk. I don't need saving. Maybe not, he said, matching her stride effortlessly. But you do need watching. His calm tone unsettled her more than the danger he hinted at. Days passed, and she couldn't stop noticing him. He was there when the bus ran late, when she closed the shop in the dark, when rain turned the sidewalk slick. Always near, always silent, always watching with that same unreadable gaze. One evening, she tripped on a loose cobblestone, groceries tumbling from her arms. She expected the sting of embarrassment, the scramble to gather her things before the bags ripped. But strong hands were already there, catching the apples before they rolled into the gutter, lifting the weight from her arms as if it were nothing. Careful, Mitchell murmured, his voice low, steady. The city doesn't forgive clumsy. Raylan flushed, brushing her hair from her face. I can manage. I know. He handed the bag back gently. But why should you have to? Something in his tone, unexpected tenderness, quiet sincerity, slipped past her defenses. She looked away, unwilling to let him see how much it rattled her. Mitchell found himself circling closer than he'd intended. He told himself it was strategy, a way to keep eyes on her in case Donovan struck. But the truth pressed harder each day. He was drawn to her silence, to the way her loneliness mirrored his own. One night, he insisted on driving her home. The bookstore had stayed open late, and the streets were darker than usual. I'll walk, she protested when he pulled up. It's not a request. His voice was steel, but when she glanced at him, his eyes were softer. In the car, the silence stretched. Raylan stared out the window, watching neon blur past. Then, unexpectedly, Mitchell spoke. You read a lot. She blinked, surprised. You've been watching that long? His lips curved faintly. Long enough to know you live more in those books than in the world outside. Raylan frowned, her chest tightening. And what's wrong with that? Nothing, Mitchell said. Except the world's already trying to erase you. You don't need to help it. For the first time, she laughed, a soft, startled sound that made his chest ache. In another part of the city, Donovan sat with his lieutenants, smoke coiling in the dim light as maps and photographs littered the table. At the center lay Raylan's picture, her face plain, forgettable to most, yet now carrying a price. She's nothing, one of his men scoffed. Just a girl. Exactly, Donovan said coldly, his mouth curving into a thin smile. And yet, she was marked, paid for. The men glanced at each other uneasily. Everyone knew Donovan didn't move without motive or money. He tapped the edge of Raylan's photograph. A whisper came from Selena Varga herself, the wife of a powerful man, eaten alive with jealousy. She swore her husband had grown too fond of this nobody. She wanted the girl erased, clean, quick, forgotten. And she paid well for it. But the job was not done because Mitchell interfered. Donovan's eyes glittered with something darker than rage. Now it's better. She belongs to Mitchell. He spilled blood to protect her. He put his name into this mess, and that means I don't just have Celine's coin, I have a weapon. He leaned back, sipping his drink, his voice low and deliberate. Let Mitchell circle her. Let him fall deeper. When the time comes, I'll remind him that the girl he bleeds for was bought and paid to die, and when I strike, it'll cut him where it hurts most. Laughter rumbled around the table, but beneath it lay tension. They all knew this wasn't just business anymore. It was the spark of war. Raylan stood at her window that night, rain streaking down the glass. She told herself she should feel suffocated, hunted. Instead, she felt the strangest mix of fear and relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had fought for her. But she didn't know the whole truth, that another woman's jealousy had painted a target on her back, and Donovan's men weren't finished. The night was colder than usual, a sharp wind cutting through the streets as Raylan left the bookstore. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, clutching the strap of her bag. The bell above the door had barely stopped ringing when she felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Someone was watching. She glanced over her shoulder, but the street looked empty, just shadows pooling in doorways and the faint buzz of neon signs. She told herself to breathe, to keep moving. Mitchell hadn't been around for 2 nights now. A part of her had been relieved to have space, but another part, it had felt like abandonment. She didn't know he had been close all along. Mitchell's car idled 2 blocks down, his men scattered in unmarked spots around her route. He had ordered it after Donovan's boys started showing their faces too often near her shop. Lawrence had argued he was getting too close, that protecting her would draw fire straight into his chest. But Mitchell couldn't stop. Something about her silence, her stubborn ordinariness, made him feel responsible, made him feel alive. This time, though, his net slipped. Raylan turned down the narrow side street toward her bus stop, her steps echoing too loudly. The air shifted, and then hands were on her, rough and sudden, dragging her back into the shadows. Her cry was muffled by a gloved palm. Panic surged as she kicked against the pavement, the world spinning into black as a hood was forced over her head. She fought, but the grip was iron. Minutes later, Mitchell's phone rang. A voice he didn't recognize sneered through the static. "We've got her!" For a heartbeat, silence roared in Mitchell's skull. He was in his office, maps and ledgers strewn across the desk, when the words hit him like bullets. His chair toppled as he stood, fury tightening every muscle in his body. "Where?" His voice was steel, ice cold. The line went dead. Lawrence stepped in at the sound of the crash, eyes sharp. "What happened?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. "They took her." Lawrence cursed, already moving. Mitchell's chest burned with something deeper than rage, guilt. He'd known Donovan would come. He'd known Raylan wasn't safe. And still, he hadn't been close enough. "She's not just bait anymore," Mitchell growled as he grabbed his coat, strapping his gun into place. "She's mine, and I'll burn this city down before I let them touch her." Raylan's world was a blur of motion and pain. They had tied her to a chair in some warehouse, the damp smell of oil and rust clinging to the air. The hood was ripped from her head, light stabbing her eyes. She blinked, heart hammering. Donovan stood before her, his smile cruel. "Do you know why you're here, Raylan?" he asked softly, crouching down to her eye level. She shook her head, her lips trembling. "You should," Donovan continued. "You were only my mission, to get rid of you. Someone paid to get that done. But that is not the case now." Raylan's stomach lurched. Paid. Her death had been ordered like a glass of wine, her life weighed and dismissed as expendable. The fear she'd been holding cracked into something worse. Humiliation, helplessness. "You're nothing," Donovan whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But now, because Mitchell fights for you, you're everything. You're his weakness, and I will use you to end him." The door burst open with a crash. He had tracked the last call he got from one of his technical system to the location. Gunfire echoed, shouts tearing through the warehouse. Mitchell stormed in like a storm unchained, his men flanking him, but his eyes locked only on her. "Raylan." Donovan spun, cursing, retreating as chaos erupted. But Mitchell didn't pause. He cut through men like they were paper, rage in every strike. Blood smeared his knuckles, his breath heaving, until at last he reached her. Her wrists were raw from the ropes. She flinched when he touched her, the memory of Donovan's words still bleeding inside her. But then she saw his face. His eyes wide, desperate, afraid in a way she never thought possible for a man like him. "I thought," his voice broke, rough and raw, "I thought I'd lost you." The ropes fell. She stumbled forward and he caught her, his arms iron around her body. For the first time, the mask of the untouchable Mafia boss was gone. He wasn't steel. He wasn't smoke. He was flesh, trembling and terrified of losing her. You can't be here," she whispered against his chest. "I can't not be," he answered, pressing his forehead to hers. "You don't understand, Raylan. I can't stand the thought of you gone. I don't care what they say. I won't let them take you from me." Her heart thudded painfully. She wanted to push him away, to demand answers about the woman who had paid for her death, but the words tangled in her throat. His hands cupped her face, his thumb brushing the tear that escaped her eye. And then, before she could think, his mouth was on hers, fierce, desperate, filled with the weight of everything he hadn't said. She gasped, her fingers clutching his shirt, the world spinning away until only he remained. Passion burned against fear, danger against longing, and she let herself fall into it, if only for a heartbeat. When they broke apart, her lips trembled. "Why me?" she whispered. Mitchell's eyes darkened, his voice a vow. "Because from the moment I saw you, I couldn't walk away. And now I never will." Outside, Donovan fled into the shadows, a bitter smile curling his lips. The girl had survived, but not for long. Mitchell thought this was over, thought saving her once meant victory. He hadn't yet realized the truth, that Raylan wasn't just random collateral. She had been chosen, paid for, marked by someone powerful, and that secret was a blade Donovan intended to twist at the perfect time. The bookstore lights flickered out one by one as Raylan turned the key in the lock. The street outside was hushed, a rare stillness settling over the city. She drew her coat close, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the memory of Mitchell's kiss, the desperation in his eyes, the vow he had whispered like a promise carved from fire. She should have felt safe in that embrace. Instead, fear coiled tighter. Donovan's words haunted her. Someone had paid for her life. She wasn't collateral damage. She was a target, bought and sold. And Mitchell, no matter how fierce, couldn't change that truth. When Mitchell's car pulled up at the curb, headlights washing her in white, her chest seized. He stepped out, his presence filling the night, every line of him sculpted from tension and raw need. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. Raylan shook her head. "You shouldn't be here." His jaw tightened. "Raylan, no." Her voice broke sharper than she intended. Convinced the main reason they are after her now is because of him, she hugged her arms to her chest. "Donovan's men come after me because of you. "You're not saving me, Mitchell. You're painting a bigger target on me. I can't—" She faltered, throat tightening. "I can't keep living like this, waiting for shadows to become bullets. Maybe if you weren't near, maybe they'd forget me." The words sliced through him. For a moment, Mitchell said nothing. His hand flexed at his side, his eyes dark, hollow with a hurt he didn't try to hide. "You think I'll walk away?" he asked finally, voice low, ragged. "You think I could?" Tears stung Raylan's eyes. "You have to." She turned, forcing her feet to move, forcing herself not to look back. Every step away from him tore at her, but she didn't stop. Mitchell watched her fade into the night, his chest caving as though each footfall cracked him open. Lawrence's words echoed in his mind. You can't save everyone. But Raylan wasn't just anyone. She was the one thing he couldn't let go. Across the city, Donovan struck. A warehouse near the docks went up in flames, fire clawing at the night sky. Men scrambled through smoke, coughing, dragging each other out while bullets ripped through the chaos. Mitchell's crew barely escaped, half bloodied, half broken. Lawrence slammed through the office door hours later, his shirt streaked with soot. "They're tightening the noose," he rasped. "We lost 3 good men tonight." Mitchell stood in the center of the room, fists clenched, his rage barely caged. He could see Donovan's hand in every detail, the precision, the cruelty. He could also see the cracks forming in his empire, and it hollowed him. He wanted to run to Raylan, to tell her she'd been right, that without him she might survive. But the truth was worse. Donovan wouldn't stop. She wasn't safer without him. She was exposed, and yet she had turned her back. Raylan tried to believe she had done the right thing. She buried herself in routine, opening the shop each morning, forcing her smile for the few customers who trickled in. She told herself the silence in her apartment was peace. She told herself she could breathe again, but the shadows didn't leave. She felt them when she closed the blinds at night. She heard them in the extra footstep that echoed behind hers on the way home. She saw them in the black car parked across the street too many times to be coincidence. Without Mitchell, the darkness wasn't gone, it was worse. And then, one night, it happened. She locked the shop and turned down the alley toward her bus stop. The air was heavy, her pulse quick. A figure stepped from the shadows, then another. Before she could scream, a blade flashed in the dim light. Raylan staggered back, fear clawing at her throat. She ran, her shoes slapping the pavement, but the men were faster. Hands grabbed her arm, yanking her back, cold steel grazing her neck. Her cry split the night. Mitchell was already moving. He had tracked her from a distance, unable to truly let her go, each step she took carving deeper into him. The moment he heard her scream, the sound cracked through his chest like gunfire. He charged into the alley, his gun raised, his roar tearing through the night. One man dropped before he could turn, a shot ripping through his leg. The other pressed the blade harder to Raylan's throat, using her body as a shield. "Stay back!" the man snarled. Mitchell's hand trembled around the trigger, fury battling with fear. "Let her go," he said, his voice low, steady, but his heart thundered. The blade nicked Raylan's skin, a bead of blood sliding down her collar. Her breath came fast and shallow, her eyes wide, locked on Mitchell's. She thought she saw him falter, thought she saw the man beneath the mask, a man terrified of losing her. And then Mitchell moved. A flash of steel, a crack of bone, a scream. The knife clattered to the ground, and Raylan stumbled free into his arms as the man collapsed. Mitchell held her close, his chest heaving, his hands shaking against her back. He pressed his face into her hair, the smell of smoke and fear clinging to her. "You could have died," he whispered hoarsely. "You almost did." His voice cracked, raw with terror. "And I can't, Raylan, I can't watch that happen. Not you." She clung to him, her tears hot against his shirt. The truth hit her harder than the blade had. She wasn't safe with him. But she wasn't safe without him either. Her voice broke as she whispered, "What do we do?" Mitchell pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his own dark with pain and unspoken vows. "We stop running," he said. "We stop pretending. If Donovan wants a war, then he'll get one. But he won't take you. Not while I'm breathing." For the first time, Raylan believed him. And yet, a tremor of despair lingered. Because Donovan wasn't finished. And the truth about why she'd been marked still hid in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. If you were Raylan after almost being killed twice, would you trust Mitchell to keep you alive? Or would you run from him again? Run away from all the lurking problems, no matter the cost. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It washed the city in silver, streaking the windows of the bookstore where Raylan sat, her body still trembling from the attack she had barely survived. She told herself she was safer keeping her distance from Mitchell, but the truth was a lie she could no longer hold. Without him, she was just a moving target. With him, at least the danger had a shield. She lingered in the back room, sorting invoices when she heard voices drifting from the shop floor. Mireya's laugh carried, bright, effortless as always. But there was another voice, female, sharp, and edged with irritation. Raylan froze, pressing closer to the wall. "You spend far too much time here," the woman snapped. "I can smell the dust of this place on you." Raylan's breath hitched. She recognized the voice, Selene Varga, Mireya's employer's wife. She had seen her once at a distance. Expensive perfume, diamonds that caught every shard of light. Mireya tried to soothe her. "It's just books, Selene. He likes to read. He talks about novels, poetry." "Don't insult me." Selene's voice was ice. "Do you think I don't know whose name he murmurs when he comes home late, reeking of old paper and secrets? A little shop girl who doesn't even realize she's caught his eye. That nobody, Raylan." Raylan's knees weakened. She pressed a hand to her mouth, bile rising. Selene's voice dropped lower, venom spilling into every syllable. "I paid for her to disappear. Donovan promised me she would vanish. And yet she's still alive, still walking, still breathing my air. Talk to your boss if you truly love your friend. If he doesn't stay away from her, I'll send someone else who will get the job done." Raylan's heart crashed in her chest. She stumbled back from the wall, too stunned to breathe. Mireya stammered something, but Raylan didn't hear it. Her ears rang with the truth. It wasn't random. She had been marked because of Selene's jealousy, her life reduced to collateral in a woman's paranoia. The invoices slipped from Raylan's hands as she fled through the back door into the storm. Mitchell found her on the street. He had been circling her world again, unable to keep his distance after the last attack. The sight of her running through the rain tore at him. Her face pale, her steps uneven, as though the truth had finally broken through her walls. "Raylan." His voice cut through the downpour. She turned, her eyes wild, her hair plastered to her cheeks. "It wasn't random, Mitchell," she cried. "Selene Varga, she paid Donovan. She wanted me dead because her husband comes here for books. For books, Mitchell." Her voice cracked, pain and disbelief spilling raw. "I'm nothing, but to her I was a threat." Mitchell closed the distance in 2 strides, his hands gripping her arms firmly but gently. His face was drenched, his jaw tight, but his eyes were fierce. "You're not nothing," he said, voice shaking with urgency. "Do you hear me? You are not nothing." Raylan trembled, tears mixing with rain. "I don't understand any of this. Why me? Why does it matter?" "Because you matter to me." The words ripped from him like a confession dragged out of hiding. He pressed his forehead to hers, breath harsh. "I told myself it was protection. I told myself it was instinct. But the truth is, Raylan, you're the only thing that makes me feel human in this rotten city. You make me want more than war, more than blood. You make me want to be a man again, not a monster." Her breath shuddered. She wanted to push him away, to remind him that their worlds didn't fit. But the look in his eyes, raw, desperate, real, broke through every wall she had built. Her hands lifted, trembling, and pressed against his chest. "Mitchell." And then she kissed him. Not the frantic, fear-driven kiss of the warehouse, but something deeper, something that bound her trembling soul to his scarred one. Rain poured around them, thunder rumbling above, but for a moment there was only them, her lips, his warmth, the fragile spark of hope in a city built on shadows. When they finally pulled apart, Mitchell's hand lingered at her cheek, his thumb brushing her damp skin. His voice was steadier now, grounded in purpose. "This isn't just about Donovan anymore. It's about Celine. We expose her, we cut the legs out from under him. He loses leverage, she loses her mask, and you—" His voice softened. "You get your life back." Raylan searched his eyes. "And what if I lose you?" "You won't," he vowed. "Not while I'm breathing." The words were a vow, a lifeline, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Raylan believed she wasn't just running. She was fighting beside him. Later, in the dark safety of Mitchell's apartment, maps and files spread across the table, they planned. Lawrence stood at Mitchell's side, his loyalty a steady anchor, while Raylan listened with wide eyes, determination blooming beneath her fear. "We get proof," Lawrence said. "Celine's payments, her conversations, Donovan's men will have records. Someone always leaves a trail." Mitchell nodded. "We corner Donovan, force him to spill, and when we have it, we put Celine on her knees. Her husband, her empire, they'll know what she's done." Raylan swallowed hard. "You're talking about war." Mitchell's eyes found hers, softer now. "No, I'm talking about ending one, and I won't do it without you." Her lips parted, trembling. She had never been asked to stand in the line of fire before, but in Mitchell's gaze she saw no manipulation, no control, only trust. He wasn't shielding her anymore. He was choosing her as his equal. Raylan nodded slowly, her voice quiet but steady. "Then we do it. Together." Mitchell's chest eased, his hand finding hers across the table. For the first time, the storm outside felt like background noise instead of a threat. They weren't alone anymore. But in the shadows of another office, Donovan lit a cigar, his smile slow and dangerous. He already suspected Raylan had learned the truth. And if Mitchell thought exposing Celine would end this, he was wrong. Donovan intended to use the truth as his final blade, cutting deep enough to destroy them both. If you discovered a powerful woman paid for your death out of jealousy, would you choose to fight back with your protector, or would you flee and start over alone? The night the war broke open, the city seemed to hold its breath. A thunderstorm rolled in off the coast, lightning flashing against glass towers while the streets emptied of the innocent. Everyone who mattered knew something was coming. Donovan had grown too bold, Mitchell too cornered. Mitchell stood with Lawrence at his side, rain soaking his coat as they waited by the dockyard fence. His jaw was clenched, eyes scanning the horizon where Donovan's stronghold loomed. A warehouse gutted and rebuilt into a fortress of iron and shadows. Trucks lined the yard, engines idling, men in black jackets carrying crates filled with weapons. Lawrence checked his gun, then glanced at Mitchell. "You sure about this?" Mitchell's eyes burned, his voice low, steady. "This doesn't end until he's gone. He came for her. He made it personal. Tonight, I finish it." From the car behind them, Raylene stepped out, her hair damp from rain, her coat clutched tight. Mitchell turned sharply. "You shouldn't be here." Her chin lifted, stubborn and fragile all at once. "I can't hide anymore. If this ends tonight, I need to see it. I need to know it's real." He wanted to argue, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. He gave a small nod, then handed her a smaller pistol. "Stay close. Don't hesitate." Her hand trembled as she took it, but she didn't back down. They moved fast. Mitchell's men, a dozen shadows, cut through the fence and slipped into the yard. Silencers spat death into the night as sentries fell one by one. The storm masked the chaos, thunder rolling over the muted crack of suppressed gunfire. But Donovan had been waiting. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding. Sirens wailed, and suddenly the yard erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore into the ground, sparks flying from metal crates. Mitchell dove behind cover, dragging Raylan with him. "Ambush!" Lawrence growled, firing back. Men poured out of the warehouse, Donovan at their center, his grin feral beneath the rain. "Mitchell!" His voice roared over the storm. "You think you can take me? You think a girl makes you invincible?" Mitchell's reply was a bullet that nicked Donovan's arm, making him stagger. The battle exploded into chaos. Gunfire thundered. Men screamed as the dock became a slaughterhouse. Mitchell fought like a beast unchained, his movements precise, brutal. He took one down with a shot to the knee, another with a blade drawn quick and silent. Lawrence covered his flank, firing relentlessly, their partnership flawless in its rhythm. Raylan crouched behind a steel crate, hands shaking as bullets whined past. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced her breath steady. Mitchell had trusted her to stand here, and she would not break. A shadow loomed. She lifted the pistol, finger trembling on the trigger. The man's eyes widened just before she pulled. The shot cracked, the recoil jolting through her, and he collapsed. Her heart pounded. She had fired. She had survived. Mitchell saw her, saw the terror and the fire in her eyes, and his chest tightened. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was fighting, and it fueled him with something deeper than rage, hope. But Donovan wasn't done. He bellowed orders, his men surging like a tide. The battle pushed closer to the warehouse, flames sparking from ruptured fuel tanks. The yard became a furnace of fire and rain. Then Donovan appeared, looming from the smoke with a rifle in his hands. He fired, and Mitchell staggered, pain ripping through his side. Blood bloomed against his shirt. "Mitchell!" Raylan screamed. He dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth, the world tilting. Donovan raised his gun again, aiming straight for his heart. Raylan didn't think. She ran forward, shouting Donovan's name. Her voice cut through the chaos, startling him just long enough. His aim shifted, his eyes narrowing at her sudden defiance. "Why fight for her?" he snarled. "She was bought to die." Raylan stood trembling, but her voice didn't break. "Then let me live to ruin you." Mitchell seized the opening. With a roar, he surged upward, driving his blade into Donovan's chest. The two men clashed, fists and fury, rain slicking their skin as blood stained the ground. Donovan fought like an animal, but Mitchell's rage was sharper, forged in love and desperation. He drove him back, each strike fueled by the sight of Raylan alive, breathing, fighting for him. Finally, with one last thrust, Mitchell buried the knife deep. Donovan choked, eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing into the mud. The yard went silent except for the storm. Mitchell swayed, blood loss threatening to drop him. Raylan rushed to him, her hands pressing against his wound. "Stay with me, please. Stay with me." His hand lifted, weak but steady, brushing her cheek. "Told you, not while I'm breathing." His voice was ragged, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. Lawrence barked orders, rounding up the remaining men as sirens wailed in the distance. Police, drawn by the inferno. But Mitchell's crew was already slipping away, vanishing into the storm, leaving only Donovan's body and burning wreckage behind. Days later, the city woke to headlines that shattered its polished facade. Selena Varga, the elegant wife draped in jewels, was exposed. Evidence leaked. Transfers of money, recordings of hushed conversations, Donovan's confessions recovered from his files. Her scheme to eliminate Raylan had been dragged into the light, her jealousy turned into her undoing. The press feasted. Her family's empire collapsed overnight. Her husband disowned her publicly, and Celine was cast out in shame, her exile whispered about in every circle that once bowed to her. And Raylan was no longer invisible. She sat at Mitchell's side as he healed, the scar at his ribs a reminder of how close she had come to losing him. He grumbled at her fussing, but his hand always found hers, holding tight. "You nearly died for me," she whispered one night, her voice breaking. "I lived for you," he corrected softly, pressing his forehead to hers. "And I'll keep living for you. Always." If you were Raylan, would you have risked your life in that moment to save Mitchell, or stayed hidden and safe? The war ended not with another bullet, but with silence. A silence that stretched over the city in the weeks that followed Donovan's fall, a silence that meant Mitchell's name was spoken only in whispers, and Raylan's was no longer marked. Donovan's men scattered or bent the knee, their empire shattered, their leader buried in the mud he thought he ruled. For Raylan, the quiet felt almost unreal. She no longer jumped at every shadow, no longer flinched at footsteps behind her. The bookstore reopened, customers trickling in again, the ordinary hum of life returning to her days. But she knew she was not the same woman who had once eaten dinner alone beneath golden chandeliers, invisible to the world. She had been seen, she had been claimed, and though it had terrified her, it had also saved her. It was Mireya who came first, slipping into the shop one afternoon while the rain tapped gently at the windows. She hesitated by the counter, her hands twisting in her coat sleeves, her eyes uncharacteristically shy. "Raylan," Mireya's voice wavered. "I owe you the truth, and an apology." Raylan blinked, lowering the stack of books she was shelving. "For what?" Mireya swallowed hard. "I knew. Not everything, but enough. I heard whispers in Selena Vargas' house long before the first attack. I tried to warn her off, tried to steer attention away from you, but I couldn't stop it. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I didn't tell you, maybe you'd stay safe. I thought I was protecting you." Tears stung her eyes. "But instead, I left you in the dark." Raylan's heart clenched. Anger flared for a moment, sharp with betrayal, but it faded quickly beneath something deeper, understanding. Mireya hadn't been an enemy. She had been caught in the same storm, fighting in her own way. Raylan stepped forward and took her friend's hands. "You should have told me," she whispered, "but I know you were trying to help. You don't need to apologize anymore. It's over." Mireya's lip trembled. "And you're still here, still breathing. Thank God for that." Raylan pulled her into a hug, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the bond of friendship wrap around her as tightly as Mitchell's arms had. She wasn't alone, not in love, and not in life. That evening, Mitchell found her standing at the window of his apartment, the skyline glowing beneath a calmer sky. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you remember?" he murmured. "What I said that night at the restaurant?" Raylan smiled faintly. "I remember." I whispered, "Tonight you're mine." Back then, it was a shield, a line drawn in blood. His fingers intertwined with hers. But now it's a promise. Forever. Her eyes softened, tears shimmering. She turned in his arms, cupping his face. "And I'm yours. Not because you claimed me, because you saw me. And I'll never let you forget that." Their kiss was slow this time, unhurried, not born of desperation or fear, but of peace. Later, they sat together at a dinner table. Not hers, not his, but theirs. The chandeliers above glowed warmly, the clink of silverware soft in the air. But this time, Raylan was not alone, and she was not invisible. She laughed when Mitchell scowled at the wine list, leaned against him when Mireya teased that she was now dining with a Mafia king. For once, there was no fear, no shadows, just beginnings. Raylan had transformed from the woman forgotten at the edges of rooms into someone irreplaceable, seen, chosen, loved. And Mitchell had found his peace not through violence, but through her. Would you have trusted Mitchell after everything, or would you have run?